Hello everybody, before we dive into today's video, we're very happy to introduce one of our favorite sponsors to work with, the historic city of Quincy, Massachusetts. And yes, contrary to popular belief, both the city and the middle name of the United States' sixth president, John Quincy Adams, is supposed to be pronounced Quincy, not Quincy. In any event, ever wondered where the story of America's leadership took root? Quincy is that place. This city is home to the Adams National Historic Park, which preserves the home of Presidents John Adams and John Quincy Adams, two of America's founding fathers. You can explore the birthplaces of these iconic leaders and walk the same halls as they once did, immersing yourself in the beginnings of the United States. But Quincy isn't all about the past. It's a city that beautifully blends history with the present-day adventures and experiences. From the iconic USS Salem to the stunning views of the Blue Hills and the architectural elegance of the Thomas Crane Library and Old City Hall, there's something here for everyone. And let's not forget the Epicurean delight that is Quincy's food scene. With an array of global and local flavors, it's a culinary journey that you can't miss. To discover more about what Quincy has in store for you, check out discoverquincy.com. It's time to step into history and create some unforgettable memories. Now let's get into today's video. The American War in Vietnam, lasting from 1964 to 1973, is widely considered history's first television war. Through television and other mass media, images of the conflict were brought directly into American homes, allowing viewers to experience the horrors of war in near real time. As covered in our previous video, What is Napalm Anyway and Who Invented It, some of these images, like that of the badly burned Vietnamese girl Phan Thi Kim Phu fleeing her recently bombed village, would help turn the public opinion against the war. Others, however, had a more galvanizing effect. In April of 1967, Life magazine ran a photograph by correspondent Lee Lockwood showing Lieutenant Commander Richard A. Stratton, an American prisoner of war, bowing submissively before his North Vietnam captors. This image exposed the brutal regime of mistreatment and torture inflicted by the North Vietnamese on captured American servicemen, sparking widespread outrage and leading to a dramatic shift in the prosecution of the war. This is the disturbing story of the Stratton incident, the bow that shocked a nation. Richard Allen Stratton was born on October 14, 1931 in Quincy, Massachusetts, the second child born to Mary Orr and Charles Stratton. The Stratton family had a proud history of military service. Richard's father, for instance, served in the U.S. Navy during the First World War and the Massachusetts State Guard during the Second, while his elder brother, Charles Stratton Jr., served in the Marine Corps during the Korean War. At first, the younger Stratton followed in his father's footsteps, enlisting in the Massachusetts State Guard as a cadet in 1947. The following year, however, he left the military to pursue a career in the clergy, enrolling at the Our Lady of Hope Minor Seminary in Newburgh, New York. After completing his novitiate, or apprenticeship, in 1952, he studied philosophy at the Oblate College in Washington, D.C., and graduated from Georgetown University in 1955 with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Government. Meanwhile, Stratton was developing another passion: aviation. As a teenager, he spent many hours watching aircraft take off and land from the nearby Denison Airport and Naval Air Station Squantum, the fascinating history of which we have already covered in our video Amelia Earhart, Denison Field, and the Dawn of U.S. Commercial Aviation. And so it was that upon graduating from Georgetown in 1955, Stratton enlisted as a naval aviation cadet, completing his basic flight training and aircraft carrier qualification at the Pensacola Naval Complex in Florida. He then moved on to advanced jet training at the Naval Air Station Chase Field in Beeville, Texas, receiving his wings and a regular commission in 1957. Between 1958 and 1962, he served 2 tours in the Far East aboard the carrier USS Ranger, flying an A-4 Skyhawk light attack aircraft as part of the Attack Squadron 94. During this time, on the side, he married Alice Marie Robertson and fathered 3 sons. Following his second tour, Stratton returned to the United States to complete his undergraduate studies at Stanford University, obtaining his master's degree in international relations in 1964. However, in the wake of the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident and the escalations of the U.S. military involvement in Vietnam, Stratton was once again deployed to the Far East, sailing from San Diego aboard the carrier USS Ticonderoga in October of 1966. Flying as a part of Attack Squadron 192, Stratton accumulated 21 combat missions missions over his first 40 days of deployment. Amusingly, Stratton's prominent nose earned him the call sign Serrano, later changed to the Beak. In any event, on January the 5th, 1967, Stratton and his wingman, Commander John Parks, took off from the Ticonderoga on a weather reconnaissance mission over Hanoi Province, North Vietnam. The aircraft were armed with 2¼ inch unguided folding fin aerial rockets, or FARs, to be used against any targets of opportunity. Upon completing their primary mission, Stratton and Parks descended and flew along the North Vietnamese coast, hunting for enemy cargo ships or portable bridge sections. Stratton later recounted what happened next. Upon locating a bridge section, I launched rockets from the Aero 7D pod. They misfired, collided, and exploded, and the debris went into my jet's engines, causing it to disintegrate. I ejected from my aircraft just as the tail blew off the airframe, parachuting into the canopy of the only tree behind the only house in 5 square miles. I was captured by armed peasants before I could get the helmet off my head. They cut all the clothing from my body, leaving me barefoot in shorts and a t-shirt, blindfolded me, and then started me on an 18-hour march. The first day of my capture was an adventure in itself. The peasants were understandably angry with me, and those that could reach me beat me severely about the head and shoulders. I was given no food or water, but I was in no way systematically abused. My captors made an effort to protect me. By dawn of the next day, I had been transported to downtown Hanoi to their main prison. I was turned over to the regular army and communist political cadre without any major injuries, either from the ejection or the peasants. The prison in question was the infamous Hoa Lo, known to American POWs as the Hanoi Hilton. Built by the French between 1889 and 1901, when Vietnam was still known as French Indochina, the facility was originally called La Maison Centrale, or Central House, and used to hold political prisoners, particularly those agitating for Vietnamese independence. Originally built with a capacity of 460 prisoners, by 1954 the prison was home to more than 2,000 inmates, held in filthy, subhuman conditions. Abuse, torture, and executions were commonplace, turning the prison into a potent symbol of colonial oppression. Following the French defeat and withdrawal in 1955, the prison was kept in operation by the Communist North Vietnamese government, who changed its name to Hoa Lo. While commonly translated as fiery furnace or hell's hole, Hoa Lo also means stove, as referring to the large number of stores selling wood and coal-fire stoves on the Pho Hoa Lo Street. Nonetheless, the prison's infernal moniker proved disturbingly appropriate, as Richard Stratton would soon discover. Immediately upon arrival, Stratton was taken to the prison's dreaded Nobby room and subjected to brutal torture. As fellow inmate Mike McGrath later recounted, "They put your arms behind your back and they cinch up your elbows until your ribs start pulling apart. They then rotate over your head until your shoulder dislocates and no man can stand the pain. They ran a metal bar down my throat to keep me from screaming." Prisoners were also subjected to regular beatings with engine fan belts, all with the aim of extracting strategic intelligence and confessions of involvement in war crimes. According to fellow pilot Robert Schumacher, pilots were especially despised, referred to by the Vietnamese as air pirates. They just wanted to get propaganda statements out of us about how we, according to them, bombed churches and pagodas and all kinds of things, which was untrue. In the case of Richard Stratton's interrogation, the only information the military interrogators wanted from me was the list of the next targets and identification of new weapons. I did not know what they were, no one did. All meaningful targets were being designated by politicians in the basement of the White House. We would not know our targets until a couple of hours before we launched. This was not for security reasons. We had no new weapons. I had just shot myself down with rockets left over from World War II. The interrogators seemed to know this and did not pursue the issue. From about 1965 to 1969, the North Vietnamese Army Communist political cadre freely used torture to obtain propaganda, to force interviews with anti-war visitors, and to generate anti-war statements. During that period, 95% of us were tortured. 95% were made to give more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and none of us was offered the option of death. This mistreatment was authorized from the highest level of their government. Every scar upon my body was inflicted by the communist political cadre. After 2 full weeks of hard torture, Stratton was transferred to Khu Loc prison in Hanoi, known to American POWs as the Zoo. I was issued with my kit, which consisted of a uniform, which looked like 2-piece PJs with prison stripes, black boxer shorts and a t-shirt, rubber tire shower shoes, tin cup with handle, tin spoon, toothbrush, hand towel, blanket, and straw mat. The cells differed by location. At times they were cement pads with leg stalks at the base, other times they were a raised cement platform holding around 50 men, 25 on a side, head to head and resting side by side. Most of the time was on a bedboard sitting on 2 sawhorses upon which I would lay out my straw mat. The toilet facility varied from a hole in the wall to a waste can, with or without a lid, to a massive steel drum with welded handles which was slipped under a raised cement one-holer platform. Our food was basic: pumpkin, kohlrabi, cabbage soup, about a cupful, a weak, tasteless tea, and a chunk of bread baked in French bread format. The bread would have rodents, rodent droppings, and or gravel in it if there had been recent air raids. A special effort, with propaganda films and pictures, would be made for Christmas and Tet, our Independence Day and theirs, and periodically, after 1968, if they thought for some reason that a release might be coming. Incredibly, even these brutal conditions were luxurious next to those faced by prisoners of the Viet Cong, Pathet Lao, and Khmer Rouge guerrillas in South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. With few resources available, these prisoners were often housed in caves, huts, or cages and given little food or water. As a result, nearly 1 in 3 died of disease, starvation, injury, or summary execution. In any event, in March of 1967, Stratton was hauled away for another round of interrogation, conducted by an officer known to inmates as the Rabbit due to his buck teeth and large ears. The Rabbit presented Stratton with a written confession which stated that a December 13, 1966 raid against Van Dien, southwest of the capital, had actually been aimed at a residential area in northeast Hanoi. As Stratton later recalled, the Rabbit's confession ended up with 1 airplane carrying napalm, 1 airplane carrying cluster bombs, 1 airplane had this, 1 airplane had that, all in the same strike. I led a section of aircraft that had an airplane full of each of these delights, which is asinine because they are incompatible in an attack mode. Each one is delivered in a different way. And the camp commander said, "I know that, it doesn't make any difference. Some American pilot did it, and you might as well take the credit for it because you are an American pilot." Despite repeated beatings, Stratton refused to sign the confession or read it aloud in front of a stadium full of North Vietnamese citizens. Now apparently wishing Stratton to cooperate willingly, the Rabbit stopped the beatings and offered to compromise. He could tape record his confession instead. When Stratton again refused, the Rabbit opened the interrogation room door to reveal a familiar figure, Vegetable Vi, the prisoner torture expert. Finally defeated, Stratton agreed to make the recording. Here are 3 military types that I never saw before sitting there with a tape recorder. I realize we've got real English speakers here now, not the clowns I've been used to working with. So what's my choice? My choice was to record the whole thing in a complete monotone, and that was, to a certain measure, a success because those who heard it, my friends, my own family, were convinced that that was not my voice, that that was not me, and I tried to make it absolutely without any inflection whatsoever. And at that point was the germ of the idea that I will appear to have been doped or under the influence of something. The night we finished taping, they said, "Okay, you are going to see a group of intellectuals downtown and in the Orient. It is the custom that you will bow." In the prison system, it was routine to bow 90 degrees to any Vietnamese creature, 2- or 4-legged. If you wouldn't bow, they'd beat you down with a rifle or whatever else they had. Back in his cell, Stratton was forced to shave with a dull razor, then dressed in 2 layers of sweaters under his prison uniform to hide his emaciated body. He was then blindfolded and driven to the location of the press conference. And they bring me in through the side door of this meeting hall, take the blindfold off, and sit me down in the midst of the wreckage of bullpups, air-to-ground missiles, a CBU canister, a napalm canister, junk, and fragments. So they got some cat speaking in Vietnamese, and they've got all this rubbish here, and obviously I'm part of a dog and pony show, and the pieces are starting to fit together now. Among the gathered spectators was American photojournalist Lee Lockwood, who had heard about the press conference at the last minute and rushed over from his hotel a few blocks away. It was like a long dining room or a hall and rectangular, maybe 75 feet by 25. Along one side were French doors opening up onto an interior garden. In this room were many tables, small tables with chairs around them, and the tables had been set. There were cigarettes and matches on them, ashtrays and glasses. There were people coming in. The press presence in Hanoi was not that large, so there was much more than press there. Embassy officials, press attachés from all the different embassies were milling around, and there was a Japanese television crew. As far as I know, I was the only American there, and I think it was set up for me. I think a policy decision was made to really use this prisoner of war in the context of a big American magazine, and that I was to be the instrument. The conference was conducted in 3 parts. First, an official delivered a presentation on various types of American ordnance and where it had allegedly been used. Next, Stratton's tape recording confession was played aloud for the audience. Then finally came the main attraction, Richard Stratton himself. Lockwood later described the scene. His eyes remained blank, his face without expression as the photographer snapped away on all sides. His arms hung limply at his sides. After perhaps 60 seconds of this, during which the prisoner did not move, one of the officers, Boy perhaps, gave a command in Vietnamese. Immediately, the prisoner, still without the slightest change of expression or any indication he was awake, bowed deeply from the waist to the audience. He straightened up, did a quarter turn to the left, and bowed again deeply and slowly, his head almost reaching the level of his thighs. Again, the officer barked a command, and again, suddenly, the pilot began bowing as before. The process was repeated 3 times. Finally, perhaps after 4 or 5 minutes had passed total, the officer gave a 4th command and the pilot did an about-face and abruptly disappeared through the curtain. I was so shocked. The event was like some sort of oriental pageant. The prisoner had acted like a robot. It was impossible for me to connect the man who had walked out, bowed, and then disappeared with the firm, intelligent voice supposedly recorded just 2 days earlier. As the shock wore off, I started getting mad. What had they done to him? Why had they done it? And why, above all, had they chosen this man to show the world an example of how they treat their prisoners? Everybody I'd talked to before on the status of prisoners had said the same thing to me. The prisoners were well treated considering their status. They were given double the normal Vietnamese rations of food, medical care, reading matter, and recreation. In some, they were given considerably better treatment than Viet Cong prisoners were, according to the South Vietnamese and Americans. And so it was that Stratton's plan had worked. When Lockwood's photo of the press conference appeared in Life magazine the following month, it sparked outrage across the U.S. Upon seeing the photo, Alice Stratton, who until that moment had not even known her husband was alive, immediately knew something was wrong. I didn't know what was the matter with him, but at least I knew he was alive. The article accompanying Lockwood's photograph included a reaction from Ambassador-at-Large Avril Harriman, who stated, "From the photographs, videotapes, and descriptions by eyewitnesses that I have seen of the so-called news conference at which Commander Stratton was exhibited, it would appear that the North Vietnamese authorities are using mental or physical pressure on American prisoners of war. We all remember the ugly record of brainwashing during the Korean War. It would be a matter of grave concern if North Vietnam were using similar means against the prisoners. Hanoi has said its policy is to treat prisoners humanely. However, it has refused to allow the International Committee of the Red Cross to visit the prisoners, a right required by the Geneva Convention to which Hanoi has adhered. Without such independent verification, North Vietnam's professions of humane treatment cannot be accepted." While the Stratton incident exposed Vietnamese mistreatment of POWs to the American public for the first time, the government had known about the practice for some time before this. In April of 1966, during an interview with a Japanese television reporter, Commander Jeremiah Denton, a naval aviator shot down and captured the year before, continuously blinked the word torture in Morse code. The message was picked up by U.S. naval intelligence, but kept classified as a matter of policy. Following the disastrous press conference, Stratton was returned to the Hanoi Hilton, where he would spend the rest of the war. Among his fellow inmates were Everett Alvarez, the first American pilot captured in Vietnam, future senator and presidential candidate John McCain, and Joseph Kittinger, who would make the then world's highest parachute jump in 1959. And for more on that, see our video from the edge of space. In any event, while bad food and regular beatings were still a fact of life, by now conditions had begun to improve, if only slightly, at the Hanoi Hilton. In early 1967, a new, more spacious section of the prison was opened for American POWs. The airmen, many of whom had trained at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, dubbed the area Little Vegas and named the buildings after Las Vegas Strip landmarks, such as the Golden Nugget, Stardust, and Desert Inn. At first, silence was strictly enforced, forcing the prisoners to communicate via tapping code or a form of sign language. While many escape attempts were made, none were successful, as Mike McGrath recalled. "I heard Ed Atterbury go out the ceiling that night, and we said, well, the torture starts tomorrow. And we were right. They came in and tortured everybody in the camp. They wanted to know who was involved in the escape." As for Atterbury, he was eventually caught and beaten to death, putting an end to future escape attempts. Then, in 1969, the prison saw a dramatic shift in policy. Following the death of the North Vietnamese leader Ho Chi Minh, the torture suddenly stopped and prisoners were given more food and greater freedom to mingle. As Richard Stratton recalled, Until the very end, we were seldom let out of our cells except periodically to wash at an open-air horse trough. We made our own amusement. We made cards, chessboards, and pieces from the toilet paper. We took turns reciting movies, plays, and short stories to each other. We ran a school of the ship, each one teaching his favorite subject, from automobile repair to physics, Latin to Spanish, public speaking to novel writing. In solitary confinement in our minds, we would build boats, houses, take trips, recreate grammar school seating charts, write poetry, and say our prayers. On May the 10th, 1968, the Paris peace talks commenced. In our jails, we knew that these were a farce. And indeed, they were. Lasting for 3 years and 8 months, President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger concluded that the communists were not serious. In late December 1972, unveiled a stratagem to turn the talks into serious negotiations. Linebacker 2 entailed the intensive bombing of high-value military targets in downtown Hanoi, Haiphong, and their surrounding areas. We American POWs were perhaps the only human beings ever to welcome coming directly under endless strings of B-52 bombing attacks. We cheered, the communists wept, negotiated, and gave in. The accords were signed on January the 27th, 1973. We were free. Indeed, on March the 4th, 1973, as a part of Operation Homecoming, Stratton and 107 of his fellow prisoners were released from their cells, given fresh clothing, and taken by bus to Hanoi's Gia Lam Airport, where an American transport aircraft was waiting for them. As Jeremiah Denton, who had first broken news of his torture in 1968, later recalled, an American plane at close range with the American flag on it, U.S. Air Force, and American military uniform personnel 50 to 100 yards away from us. You don't know the feeling it gave me, and I'm sure everybody else. Despite having been held in prison for 2,251 days, Richard Stratton was one of the lucky ones. Everett Alvarez, shot down in August of 1964, spent nearly a decade in captivity, cut off from all news of the outside world. He had missed an entire era of history, from the British invasion to the moon landing. And of the 493 American airmen captured by the Vietnamese, 28 died in prison. As prisoner Charlie Plum later recalled, those who made it through credited their survival to the bonds they forged with their fellow prisoners. It's a fraternity like no other. When you got guys that saved your life and they say that you saved their life, you have a bond like no other. Following his return to the United States, Richard Stratton remained in the Navy, rising to the rank of captain and holding various positions, including commanding officer of the New York Navy Recruiting District and deputy of operations at the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland. Upon his retirement in 1986, he joined his wife in the field of clinical social work, working with victims of substance abuse, sex offenders, and PTSD sufferers in Rhode Island, Georgia, and Florida. He also served as the chairman of the Department of Veterans Affairs Advisory Committee on Prisoners of War from 1989 to 1995. Richard and Alice Stratton retired in 2001 and now live in Fleet Landing, Florida. In 2019, Arlington Street in Stratton's hometown of Quincy, Massachusetts was renamed Stratton Way in his honor. At the dedication ceremony, Vice Admiral Matthew J. Kohler spoke of the significance of Stratton's defiant act in 1967. Lieutenant Commander Stratton was forced to read a so-called confession and was featured in a Life magazine photo that showed him bowing deeply to a North Vietnamese officer. This was not a bow of submission. He bowed in a way to raise doubt and confusion about the confession and gave proof to the fact that the North Vietnamese were indeed abusing our prisoners of war. Having the courage to do this, he contributed significantly to the North Vietnamese being questioned by other countries and abandoning the harsh treatments. Today, I would think it appropriate to call the Stratton incident the Stratton Way because it shone the light forward for all of us and was classic Dick Stratton.